I'm coming out of the sunshine and into the daffodil garden. When I was in seminary, I kept trying to see this story of Jesus from different perspectives, not the one I had grown up with. And how I did that, because I came into the seminary from theater and storytelling, was that I tried to think about what other people in the story were thinking and how they might have told the story. And that is how I wrote what you heard about Mary Magdalene's journey to the tomb. I wondered about how she felt that morning. And then, right around the time I was going to write that, and I was in the middle of it, I went to a conference, and as many of you know, I attended a Quaker seminary in Indiana, Earlham, and they have very interesting symposia, many of them peace-related and about different things. And there was a symposium I didn't really know about called Journey of Hope. And I walked in, and my dear friend named Jane, who she's blind and works at Earlham and has been blind since she was 2 years old, and she came to Earlham from her work in prisons. An incredible woman. So I saw her there and I thought, this one will be good. And I went, and there were 3 seats in the front row, and I'm not a front row sitter, so I do understand the reason why we have so few in the front rows, because I'm not someone who sits in the front row, but that time I thought, oh, this is going to be good, I'll sit in the front row. So I went, and there was 1 seat available, and it was between, of course, between 2 people. And I sat in that seat. And after a few minutes, it began, and I realized that I was sitting in the middle of the panelists for a journey of hope, which is another reason why it's hard to sit in the front row. On this side of me was a man named Bill Pelkey, and on this side of me was a woman named Bess Glasson Landis. Now, Bill Pelkey, when he got up to tell his story, I started to understand what they were there for. Bill Pelkey told of how in 1983 his grandmother had been murdered by a young group of people, and she was one of those wonderful grandmothers who welcomes everyone. And she would often open her home to young people and tell them stories, especially stories of her faith. And on that day, there were these girls, 15, 16 years old, who wanted money to play games at one of these game, I know what they're called. What are they called? Arcades, yes, thank you. At an arcade, and they didn't have any money. And one of them said, I know a woman who probably keeps money, and she opens her doors to people like us. So even though it was an afternoon and they should have been in school, his mother opened the door. And these girls who had been drinking and smoking marijuana killed his mother. His grandmother, very, very cruelly. So cruelly that when it came to the time of sentencing, the girl who was the ringleader, the girl who had instigated all of this, at 15 years old was given the death penalty. In the state of Indiana, where this talk took place. And my friend said he sat there in the courtroom and he heard this man in the back, whose voice he didn't want to hear, who said, "My baby, they're going to kill my baby." It was the girl's grandfather. So Bill and his family wanted what they called justice. And Bill called that justice, and they were thinking about how this 14-year-old by the name of Paula Cooper was going to receive the death penalty. And then one day, when Bill Pelkey, who was a crane, again I'm losing my words, crane operator, thank you, who was a crane operator, was in the middle of operating his crane, and, and he almost heard a voice, and that voice said, "Forgive them, they know not what they do." And I think that might have been the same voice that Mary Magdalene heard. But anyway, that voice, that sense that he needed to forgive, even though it was not what he initially wanted to do, led that horrible heaviness that he had from, I mean, all of us who've experienced, everyone who's experienced death. I mean, the death of a loved one is heavy. But when a loved one is brutally killed, can you imagine how heavy that would be? Well, that heaviness for Bill Pelkey transformed into the beginnings of compassion. And this didn't happen all at once. It happened over time for him. But little by little, he began to change his heart. And then he got involved, and he was the one who started this whole journey of hope, where people bravely come and tell these stories. The woman on my right, Beth Glasson Landis, came home at 13 years old, and her mother had been killed by someone. And she and her sisters held that horrible feeling on their hearts for many, many years, until it was too much for them. And as Mennonites, they came to lots of services where I think the minister was giving the message that I'm giving, and that is that they felt that they had to move, they had to change the feeling that they had into some kind of compassion and forgiveness. And Beth and her sisters were able to do that, and they also journeyed with this group. In this group, too, were family of people who had a member of their family on death row. And as some of you who are reading the UUA Common Read, The New Jim Crow, one thing that Bill said, or no, I think it was Beth, I'm sorry, Beth said was that when at first she thought that the worst of the worst were on death row, and the more that she entered this journey, she realized it was the poorest of the poor who were on death row. So here I am, sitting in the middle of all of this transformation, crying and wishing I weren't in the front row. And it started me thinking. I mean, I wrote about Mary Magdalene, and I wrote about what a burden it was for her to carry to that tomb. And at the same time, she was carrying those voices of her friend who had said on the cross, "Forgive them, Father, they know not what they do." And then I began to think of these things we carry as stones. And each of you has a stone. Does anyone not have a stone who came in late? Because we have enough stones for everyone. We need a stone there. Oh, Peggy has stones if you need a stone. Okay. This stone symbolizes these things that we bring with us. And I imagine that one thing I think that Unitarian Universalists share is that we all bring stones with us. I mean, I think most humans carry these stones in our hearts, but often their stones come from different things, and that's the next thing I want to talk with you about, is Bill's stone was, people came in and they killed his grandmother, and then he had to deal with it. He couldn't not deal with it. And I began thinking of some of my stones. And I was thinking about how there would be children here today. And so I thought of a stone, and I actually brought it with me, but I think it's up on the podium. But it was a little handkerchief. When I was a child, I went to a lot of different schools in a lot of different countries. And I was always dealing with different kinds of people. And I had this handkerchief that had a tiger on it, and this girl who was, I was the only American in this school. She came and she said to me, she said, Patty, you stole my handkerchief. And I said, no, I didn't. And it became this big thing. I don't know why my mother kept this handkerchief. She sent it to me a few years ago. But there was that feeling of injustice, and I brought up the handkerchief story because actually it was horrible for my life. It sounds like such a silly thing, but I had no control over going to school, and this girl named April, who thought I stole something from her, was sitting next to me, and she had a sick mother, which made me look like I was this really rotten person for saying, no, I didn't steal your handkerchief. And I should have said, here, take it back. But I wanted to keep my handkerchief. So that was one of the things. Another thing I carried from my childhood, from living in other countries, is the injustice. In the heart of my life, when I was 3 years old, a woman named Carmen took care of me. Carmen took such good care of me, and she played with me and my brothers. And then I found out that Carmen had a little girl, just my age. But Carmen lived with us all week. She went home 1 day a week. The rest of the time she was caring for me. So my care came out of a real injustice, that Carmen could not be with her own daughter. And I remember my mother telling me this when she insisted that I give my big Goldilocks Christmas present to Carmen's daughter, which I did do that. But these things, these injustices that surround our lives, I believe they stay with us. My first month as a university student, Salvador Allende was taken out of Chile, of the presidency of Chile, by our people. And I think that, and I'm bringing these things up because I think that many times it's these things, it's the pictures of penguins who are suffering from the effects of global warming. A lot of these things, along with what we experience personally, sit on our hearts, and they are heavy. And what can we do with this? And then I had to realize that a lot of things in my life had created stones, really big burdens for other people. That my happiness in having a relationship with Lou, in meeting her, gave a huge stone for my mother that sits on her heart. And when I look at it that way, and I think about, what would I like my mother to do with that stone? I don't want my mother to suffer because of something that I did. And I wish that somehow It is that work of turning those stones, as Bill had to do, turning the stones, transforming them into compassion, being able to see things differently, so that and gradually that pain lifts, and then it comes back, and then it lifts, and then it comes back, and then it lifts. And then I hope, because I believe that it is possible, and maybe that is the hope that we can live into in community, that there could be a time when all of those stones could lift from us, but then maybe somebody the next day would give us another one. So right now, I want you to feel the stone in your hand. I want you to feel, I've given you some clues as to what my stone has felt like, the stones that I've carried. And now I want you to all hold your stones and feel the weight in your hands. Feel them as they're smooth or rough. And breathe with your stone. Think about all that is in there. And now I want you to think of the beginning of ways of bringing compassion to the things that are in that stone. And our first step towards compassion is I want you to listen for all the stones in this room, for they are crying out. Listen to the person next to you. Let us listen to what we bring here. For I feel if we can hear the person next to us breathe, that is perhaps the beginning of compassion. Can you hear the voices of the stones? But we cannot stop here. This is one step. But we are, as Cardinal Jaime of Manila said, charity without justice is baloney. So for us to simply sit here and envision this charity bursting from our hearts and compassion is an important step. And I believe that that is what we see in people like the Dalai Lama. How can he shake hands with the Chinese? But yet he does, and you can see the love from his face. He meditates on compassion 4 hours a day. Do we have time for that? So that is important, but compassion must be followed by action. And that is why I want to say a little bit about how I have turned stones into action. And as your minister, often I feel like when I meditate, it's like I can hear your stones talking. And one thing that I have heard so much is about the environment And I have just become so irritated, and I told you 2 weeks ago, or 3 weeks ago, how irritated I was that the car company had lied to me about the mileage in my car. So this car that I'm bringing to you was getting 25 miles per gallon when they said it would get 40. Anyway, with you, carrying all of you with me, I turned that car in, and you will notice sitting in front of the Blue Lemon, a bright red electric car. And that, you know, that's a big thing. And it really felt good that I'm not doing anything to the environment when I come to serve you. So I want you to think for a moment now of the things that you can do. And I think one of the big things is that nothing is too small. Is there anything that really bothers you? Like, I am so bothered by the way we have hurt the economic systems around the world, that for me, buying fair trade goods relieves that pain. Or when Lou and I perform a theater work where we give half of the proceeds to microlending in Central America and Mexico, we feel that we are doing something, and I am telling you, it helps. We cannot ignore, as Unitarian Universalists, we cannot ignore the heaviness. We have to turn it into something. And that is the work we are here to do today. As we close, I want to draw your attention to the many stones we now have that represent that collective power of compassion and action that lives in this room. The cloth here also cries out. It is one of my prized possessions given to me by friends. It was the dream of someone, I'm sure, who had something very hard on their heart when they saw that so many women in Bangladesh who were poor had to sell themselves in order to feed their families. This cloth is part of an effort that is ongoing in Bangladesh, where women take old saris, the old clothing, and do stitches and make it into these wonderful cloths that then they can have a living and be able to give money to their family. I bear witness to you that when we turn to this compassion, and when we ask for a way that we can be of help, in the way that only we can be of help, only that person who thought of that idea, who went to Bangladesh, I'm imagining, and saw something, and didn't just turn off their mind and go home, but thought, ooh, how can I turn this feeling, this compassion, this feeling that I have of the suffering that is happening into action? And I look forward to all of the action, the individual and collective action that will come from this place. May it be so. Amen. And happy Easter.